Welcome to the Groove Pod, everybody. We're here in Season 2, Episode 3. Although, as I've said before, this is not a linear or sequential podcast. You can jump in at any time, listen to any order that you want to. We just have a kind of an isolated chit-chat in each episode that doesn't require you to have heard the previous episodes. Speaking of previous episodes, my audio might sound a bit different today. I'm trying something entirely new. I hope it works okay. I'm going to apologise if it doesn't sound so good, and I'm going to say you're welcome in case it sounds even better. So all bases are covered. Now, Nick, do you want to drop a tease, and then we'll move on to what we're actually going to talk about today?
Yes, I mean, I'm ready. I'm ready to talk about these Zunes, Lock. I've been ready for months, really. But let's not talk about it right now.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
We'll hold it off.
Yeah, let's
So Nick still has his, a little bit later. Nick still has his big bag of Zunes that he will talk about on an episode, but
I mean, it's a bag of Zunes. I mean, a big bag of Zunes.
Okay.
So
it's a bag of Zunes. That's special.
Yeah, somewhat subjective. It's a bag of Zunes. Yeah, maybe it's a big bag. I don't know.
I mean, relative to other bags of Zunes, as opposed to bags.
As bags of Zunes go, this is, I would say this is on the larger side. So it's definitely a larger bag of Zunes. If we ever do merch for this podcast, I think a larger bag of Zunes, or on the something, there has to be something to do with bags of Zunes. Anyway,
I agree. Yep.
Anyway,
so what we're actually going to talk about today, because we are going to hold that one off, only because I think Adam, who has joined us a couple of times now, would love to be part of that one, and I haven't had a chance to tee that up with him. I've got a whole lot of stuff going on behind the scenes with getting the studio ready for the channel. Not ready, but you're trying to improve it to a point that it doesn't cause me issues like today, having to find the right microphone, to not have sound issues. Just generally getting stuff done for the channel is challenging. So I will get Adam organised, and we will eventually talk about your larger than average bag of Zunes. However, today we're going to talk about audiophile terms, because when we were planning this session of recording, I said to you, I've just finished a video about this topic and didn't know if it was something that you wanted to dig into at all, because, a whole point of this podcast is the discussion of audio and learning about being an audiophile and getting into the hobby more and deeper and stuff like that. So that's where we've landed. You had a specific term that you might want to lead us off with, and it happens to be one that I didn't talk about in the video. So do you want to explain where you're coming from and what your question was?
Absolutely. Yeah, I every now and then in my Reddit feed, something from the audiophile subreddit will pop up, and I'll if the title is sort of interesting or a bit obscure, I'll check it out. And recently, I've been seeing reference to holographic sound. Someone saying, when they're referring to a system, they'll refer to it being holographic or a holographic quality, and that is a word that I sort of exclusively associate with visuals. And sort of a visual concept. And so I wanted to, I was going to ask you this anyway, so the timing is really quite
cool.
Apropos. What does that mean? How can you have holographic sound, and what does that, I think I know what it means, but I would love to hear from you. What does holographic sound mean?
Yeah, so I think of that, and one of the challenges here is there's no dictionary on this. There's no like audiophile Webster's or anything like that. So how I think of it is, if a system's holographic, each sound is very clearly defined in space, to the point that with your eyes closed, you can imagine and understand in your mind exactly where every sound's coming from. So it's an audio equivalent to exactly what it is visually, which is, if you look at a holograph or a hologram, I think it's called, the image itself, like you think about Star Wars, the famous scene of R2-D2 and the little Princess Leia standing on out in the air in front of R2-D2 saying, "Help me, Obi-Wan, help me, Obi-Wan." That is what I think of as a hologram, and it's like an image of something that is not actually in space but seems real and in space out in front of you. That's how I think of it with audio. And so a good example, I think, is with speakers. It does happen, I find, in headphones and earphones if they're really, really good, and if your whole source chain's really good. But I think it's really common in speakers, where some people talk about a system where the speakers disappear, and it's like you're no longer hearing two individual points of music, you're just hearing the sound as if the musicians are in the room with you. That's what I think of when it's holographic. It's that ability where if you closed your eyes, if you were brought into the room blindfolded and sat in the perfect spot, and they turned on the music, would you actually think, "Oh my God, there's a band in front of me," as opposed to a pair of speakers in front of you? That's how I think of it. Is that what you were kind of assuming?
It's exactly what I assumed. However, I just wondered if there was something different from, I guess I wondered, how does holographic, what's the Venn diagram when using that phrase with a soundstage. So if you're describing the soundstage, would you describe the soundstage as holographic, or are they two sort of different qualities?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think they're related but different. And the reason I say that is that how I've described it in this video, so it is perfect timing because I've got this really clear in my head now. In the video, I talked about the fact that a soundstage, I think of the soundstage as being like the room. So how big is the room within which the music is happening? How wide are the walls? How deep is the room? How close to that room are you standing? Like, are you on the outside looking through the window, or are you sitting inside the room? And if you're inside the room, how close to the musicians within that room are you sitting? So all of that to me is to do with soundstage. But then within that, there's what I think of as, and what I refer to as, the imaging of the music. And that's much more about where is the furniture in the room and how clearly can you see the furniture in the room, except in this case, the furniture is each instrument. So if you've got a guitar, a bass guitar, a set of drums, a vocalist, and maybe a keyboard, can you, in your mind, if you're listening to it, maybe with your eyes closed, can you pick out exactly where out in front of you and how far away from you or close to you each of those instruments is sitting within that sonic image, within that room or that soundstage? And I think it's the imaging within the soundstage that is more what creates that sense of holographics. Because if it's not clearly focused, if that image is a bit blurry or unclear, everything kind of merges together and it becomes more like a two-dimensional kind of blob of music, if you like, and less of a series of individual Princess layers on top of R2-D2. So when I'm listening to music, a really great musical experience for me is where I can close my eyes and go, yep, the singer is right in front of me about 2 meters away. The guitarist is slightly behind the singer off to their left or off to my left. The bass guitar is on the other side, a similar distance away. I can hear the drums further back directly behind the singer. That's to me when the image is getting really clear, and then you get that sense of holography, if that's even a word, where you've got a precise sense of where each person or each instrument is within that soundstage. That's how I think of it. And this is where it gets interesting, and I imagine in the comments section on the video when it releases, people are going to have very different views around what some of these words mean and how they interpret them. But that's how I think of it.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. I did also wonder is it synesthesia where people can see sound? Is it synesthesia?
Yeah, I think it's synesthesia where it's like some people hear
They'll see colors, or
like they see it as color, or they taste things as color, or it's a crossing over of these senses in a way that I can't wrap my head around, but I've read about it and understand the concept.
I did wonder also if holography, which I don't know if that is a word, but it should be, or a holographic is not quite sort of inducing synesthesia, but I wondered if it was less so put a blindfold on, come into the room and you don't know whether this is a recording or live musicians, and more that maybe, the fidelity is just so high that your brain, I don't know, gets confused perhaps and is I don't know, expecting something to be there visually that isn't. And that's probably what you said in just different words.
Yeah,
but
I think it's an auditory illusion. It's an auditory illusion instead of an optical illusion is kind of how I think of it. And which is exactly what you just said. It's that whole thing where your brain gets the information in such a way that it goes, there's a musician out in front of me based on what it's hearing, even though clearly there's not. There's just a couple of speakers or a pair of headphones or a pair of earphones.
Thank you. And then, so what was some of the other, can you just give me a little bit of a tease of some of the other terms you talked about in your video?
So soundstage and imaging was in there, of course, like we just spoke about. What I did as part of my preparation for the video, I did two things. I put a question on my YouTube channel as a post and said to people in the community, I said, what are the terms that just confuse you, that you don't understand? That was one thing I did. And the other thing was I went to good old AI and said to Gemini, tell me, I actually gave it the script or a copy of all the scripts I'd written over the last couple of years and said, go through this and tell me what are the terms I commonly use that are going to be confusing to people so I can explain them. And then, as I said, put out the request to people, and I asked Gemini as well, are there any other words that I maybe don't use but other people regularly report as being confusing online? So I think a lot of it came down to, because it was based on the words I use, I talked a lot about how I describe sound in terms of warmth, richness, smoothness, texture, kind of all the tonality style of stuff. So is it cold, bright, sterile, clinical, through to warm, rich, lush, and even thick? And I think of all those things on a continuum where if you've got dead neutral in the center, and who knows what that actually sounds like, but if we imagine that somewhere in the center is a thing that is truly, truly neutral, as you go in one direction, I think of it becoming going from neutral to being rich and then warm and then lush and then thick is kind of how I think of it. And at some point when you're getting towards the thick end, it's getting so rich or warm or lush that it's starting to lose detail and clarity. And that's when I think of it getting thick. But you can still have a lot of detailed sound from a lush sounding device. It's warm, it's lush, it's smooth, but it's still detailed somehow. That's kind of that end of the continuum before it falls into being overly thick. And then if we go the other direction from neutral, to me it goes kind of from neutral to a little bit cold, to a little bit bright, and then maybe to things like clinical and sterile is how I think of it. But this is where it gets really confusing because different people are going to use those terms in different ways. Some people use neutral as a negative term because they like things that are warm. I think of it as just kind of uncoloured, completely, in no way enhanced from what was theoretically in the recording. But I think the one that I thought was interesting, and I'll be curious to know if you've heard this term before and what your thoughts are on it, Nick. Have you come across the term PRATT? Have you seen people talk about PRATT anywhere? PRAT? It's an acronym.
As in PRATT summer?
No.
As in we're going to have a PRATT summer?
No, I've never heard that term at all.
No,
is that an American thing? Okay.
I think it's BRAT summer is maybe what I'm getting confused with.
Gotcha. No.
Please tell me what PRATT is. You said it's an acronym?
It's an acronym. So it stands for pace, rhythm, and timing.
Okay.
And it's a term that I loathe. I really don't like it. I don't think it should be used. Not that it's up to me, but I don't like it because it's been used. It used to get used a lot. Where I came across it was when people were using it in hi-fi magazines and stuff like that. The reviewers of professional audio reviewers in hi-fi magazines used to write about PRATT. And what it means, before I say what I think about it, what it means is it's referring to the sense of energy and dynamics and engagement that you can get from a system. So a system with good PRATT has that kind of foot tapping, head bobbing, gets you involved in the music feel to it. And a system without good PRATT may come across, technically and tonally it might sound fine, but it doesn't give you that sense of drive and rhythm in the music. And I think the reason I don't like it as a term is I think it captures too many things together. Because you might have a system that's got, maybe it sounds snappy and has a good sense of feel, but it doesn't have a good sense of punch and rhythm down low in the bass. And the timing, the element of timing in there with PRATT, I think gets confusing because timing can be about how the system is actually handling timing at a technical point of view. And that then can influence things like timbre and tonality and our ability to perceive bass. So there's so much wrapped up in it, I guess is my point, that I think it's too all-encompassing, and that's why I'm not a fan of PRATT. I just think it's confusing.
How much? So for Christmas, I got my eldest, Kendall. She wanted a CD player. I think I might have mentioned that in a previous episode. But so far she's used it maybe twice.
Oh, really?
Which is fine, which is maybe 3 times. But that's totally fine. The reason that I say that up is I decided I initially got really excited. I'm like, oh, great. I'm going to find either like a vintage boombox thing or see if someone's making a new one. And I thought, I'm going to get her something good that might last for a while. And then I decided no, this might not be actually something that she really sort of wants. So I'm not going to get absolute junk, but I will totally get very much entry level. And I did. I got an entry level CD player. I am going to cough. I'm sorry. One sec. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's right.
And it had built-in speakers. I knew they would be terrible, but I also thought, she's 13 and probably not a huge concern. But they were really bad, really bad, to the point where it almost made me angry. The sound was that bad.
Wow.
And so I hooked up. I had a spare pair of. Remember the brand? They're still around, but Creative. They make
sound blasters and stuff like that.
Yep. They're apparently still around because I had recently gotten some Creative bookshelf speakers for the kiddos for their computer, and I just hooked those up, and it actually sounded not too bad. This is under $100 for both pieces of equipment. Yep. I don't want anyone to think that this, I was investing in anything other than just, initially I thought these built-in speakers, they'll be totally fine. And they were so bad that it actually made me angry. But anyway, the reason is, but I bring that up is because as you were sort of going through PRATT and how a system, might have some qualities but not others, and how I guess what I'm trying to say is that it was very clear to me that a $50 CD player with built-in speakers was going to sound terrible. Mm-hmm. I didn't think it would sound so terrible that I would get physically angry. But but to me, it's like, okay, that at least makes sense on paper. That ain't got Pratt. That system's got no Pratt.
Yeah.
But then at some point, you're going to have speakers and you're going to have enough amplification and you're going to have, relatively, you're going to have a broad sort of dynamic range. At some point, you're going to hear all the sound, and it may be colored and it may be, the EQ may be not your cup of tea, but wouldn't you always be tapping your toes? Like, I'm sort of pushing back on the whole idea of how can a system not make you want to tap your toes? Like, it's the music that makes you tap your toes, unless you've spent $45 on it and the speakers are so bad that you want to punch your own eyes out with a spoon. So, like, that was a very long way of me sort of saying, like, at what point does, I know you don't like the topic, but I don't like the term, but at what point does Pratt actually come into play, or is it even something you should consider?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I think this is exactly where the problem of Pratt comes up, which is, unless you've heard a system with and without it, it's very hard to understand. And then even when you've heard a system with it and without it, I think the reason it exists as a term is because it is such a hard thing to describe. It's so hard to say, this sounds better than this because blah, whatever blah is. And so someone's like, okay, we'll call it pace, rhythm, and timing and make it Pratt. But we could have just as easily said this system has widgy bobs, and that would have meant as much to anybody as Pratt, I think. And so, and there might be some people out there screaming at their listening devices right now going, no, of course I understand what it is. I think my point is the meaning of Pratt has become understood because people have had a chance to hear what it means. It's not self-explanatory for somebody coming in who's never heard what it means. That's probably what I'm really saying. A great example that answers, I think, your question and demonstrates why it is also a really hard term to work with. I reviewed a while back a pair of monoblock amplifiers from a brand called Topping. These amplifiers are called the B200. There's nothing wrong with them. They're perfectly fine. They do a good job. They've got plenty of power. And I reviewed them and said I really wasn't a fan because they didn't engage me in the music. They delivered the music. It all came out of the speakers. It was loud enough. The measurements say that there's no distortion or very low distortion. And yet, as I listened, I was just like, yeah, it's playing music. The music sounds technically fine. I can't poke holes in the treble, the bass, the mid-range, anything on the surface. And yet, there were much cheaper amplifiers that I've listened to. Like Fozzy Audio make one called the MC331, I think it's called. A tiny, $150 Class D amplifier with a couple of tubes in it to add a bit of that tubiness. And it has a liveliness to its sound. The music doesn't feel like you're listening to a recording. It feels much closer to the fact that you're actually listening to musicians. Not in a fidelity point of view, but in an energy of the music point of view. Unfortunately, comes back in here. It has Pratt. And I think my understanding of it, what I've deduced, and maybe deduced is the wrong word because it maybe sounds more precise than what's going on here. My gut instinct from listening to a whole lot of gear, including these Topping B200s, a lot of brands are using what they call a lot of feedback. And basically what feedback means is that they take the signal coming out of the amplifier and they feed it back on itself in a way that it will cancel out any noise or irregularities in the signal. So if you've got a little bit of distortion coming through, I'm guessing they're probably inverting it and putting it back on itself in reverse, but at a much lower level. So it's not going to cancel out all the sound, but it's partly used. Feedback is often used to reduce gain. So if you've got an amplifier that's got, say, a factor of 100 times gain, by having that much gain coming out, they can then afford to run these feedback loops because we don't want 100 times gain. We maybe want 10 times gain maximum on an amplifier. And again, I'm just making up numbers here. The point being you want a much lower magnitude of gain because you don't need things amplified that much. And so what they do is they start with, say, 100. Again, arbitrary numbers we're using here. They start with 100, and then they might feed back on itself let's say a -1 times gain or -2 times gain. And they can do that over and over and over and over again. And every time they do it, they're bringing the gain of the amplifier down, but they're also reducing the noise and pulling the noise floor down too. And that's how they get rid of distortions in the signal. And it's probably way more complicated than what I've just described. And any engineers listening to this are probably tearing their hair out right now and hating that I'm just butchering the process. But the point of it is these gain circuits and these feedback circuits, I should say, are used to improve the measurements of the devices. And it's not to say that all feedback is evil, but if you think about it from a pure physics point of view, we've got a signal that's coming out and it has a timing element to it because music has to happen in time. And our brains are very, very detailed and accurate in terms of how they perceive timing because that's how we understand where the sounds are coming from in the world around us. A lot of the qualities of the sound is taken from timing as well. So the understanding of the timbre of an instrument comes from timing as well. So how we know whether it's a piano or a trombone or a violin, a lot of our understanding is actually happening in the first microseconds of that sound. And so when they take this signal that's come out of an amplifier chip or an amplifier circuit and they feed it back on itself, even though it's only going to take you, it's traveling speed of light, basically, or just under the speed of light for that to happen because it's electricity, even though that's happening in a number of microseconds or picoseconds, which is even smaller, behind the original signal, if they're doing it a few times over, which some of these systems now do, they use what's called nested feedback, and it's basically feedback upon feedback upon feedback. That starts to smear the signal because you're getting signal A, which is the first one that comes through, is then has signal B run on top of it to create the feedback, and then signal C on top of that. But each one is just a tiny, tiny fraction of a second, and we're talking like a fraction of a second behind the original signal. And so what we hear is a smeared version of it. And again, this is a very layman's understanding of it. What I've started to understand is that the systems that use those very heavy feedback designs never seem to capture the energy and the life of a proper musical performance. And in contrast, when I listen to amplifiers that do produce very natural and lifelike sound, they're normally using a little bit of feedback or often no feedback at all. Some of the best amps I've ever heard use no feedback, or they use a little bit of what's called local feedback as opposed to global feedback. And the only difference there, it gets not actually complicated. Local feedback is where they might have an amplifier chip and they just run a feedback loop on the amplifier chip itself, versus global feedback, as it sounds like, is where they take the signal at the very end of the entire signal path and they chuck it back at the beginning of it again. So there's a much longer process that it goes through, and it's going to smear the timing even more as a result. So this has been a very long and technical explanation, but to get back to the point of it all, my understanding is that if you're getting the timing wrong, if the timing's getting smeared in any way, that robs something from the music. Our brains are clever enough that even though we can hear it and go, yes, it's still a vocalist and a guitarist and a bass guitarist and a set of drums, we hear it and we go, we know it is that, but somewhere it doesn't sound like they're in the room with me. It sounds like it's a recording of those things. And then there's a continuum, of course, between the worst, crappiest, shittiest version of that recording and the one that's so good we start to go, if I close my eyes, I don't even know it's a recording anymore. So I think that's what's going on, is that the crappy systems will have things within them that are not handling timing effectively, and therefore what you get at the other end doesn't sound quite right to our brains.
I don't think this is related, but for some reason this is the next thing I wanted to ask you. There is I mean, you're talking about the physics of sound and of audio, and I guess that's the same thing. That was a tautology. Anyway, have you ever noticed, I'm sure you have, but I notice this when I'm like, say, in a restaurant or a pub or something, and there's very quiet background music playing. So quiet that you know there's music playing, but it's very, very subtle. But you're like, oh, I think I know this song. And you know, it's starting to dawn on you like, oh yeah, okay, I think I know what this is. I think I know what this is. And then if, just let's say hypothetically, you then move towards the source, you somehow get closer to the speaker and therefore you get more volume, and then all of a sudden it becomes apparent, yes, now I know what this song is. I often notice that the original, like when I get to that point where I'm like, oh, I actually know what this song is now, the key or the pitch appears to jump. So,
oh, wow, okay.
As in, you know, so I'll hear like, you're right. So I'm, you know, intentionally I'm, you know, doing like a muffled, quiet, something's playing in the background. But there's obviously something about it that's, you know, tingling spidey senses. And in my head, you know, I'm going through my mental crates looking for the song, and I think I sort of know what it might be. Maybe I even do know what it is. Maybe I know like, oh, that's Sultans' Swing, but it's so quiet that I really can't hear it. And then I move towards the source, and now I've got more volume, and the song is obvious. But all of a sudden, not only is the song obvious and I know what it is, it's actually pitched up higher.
Wow.
Like I was hearing it at in a lower key, or not in the correct key. Does that ring any bells to you? And I often wonder about this because it happens to me somewhat frequently. especially if I'm in a restaurant, in a bar, somewhere. As I said, I'm away from the source, but I can sort of hear that something's playing. I sort of think I know what the song is. I find myself getting up to walk to the bar or the restroom or whatever, and all of a sudden I'm under the speaker. The song comes into fidelity, and but it's now up. It's now up a key or two or three.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh wow, that was so weird. Like I was hearing that key essentially. I was hearing that song key down many steps.
That's fascinating. I've never experienced it, so I don't know. I don't know what the
Ah,
answer would be
man, I
to
thought
that
you were going
one.
to solve this problem for me, Locke.
No, I can't think of anything that I know about how we hear sound that would explain why that's happening. I mean, the only thing, I don't think this would relate to it, but the only thing I'm thinking of is reflections and reflected sound is very important to how we perceive sound. But I don't know that it's important for pitch so much as spatial understanding. Because I remember when I did some research for a video I did some time ago, I never knew this until I did this research, but our brains take in the most ridiculous number of reflected pieces of sound constantly, to the point that they discovered that the sound that comes off a ceiling down onto our shoulders, bounces off our shoulders and up into our ears is actually still important. They did a test. I'm trying to remember how they managed to do the
Who's
test.
they?
Some scientist somewhere that was interested in audio perception. It was a proper scientific article though. And they
Sure it was.
did this study where they placed, I hope I'm remembering this right, they placed speakers against each wall in such a way that from memory, it was going to prioritize or emphasize the effect of the sound bouncing off the ceiling and hitting the person's shoulders. And if I'm remembering it correctly, they could start a sound on one side of the room and they could feed it to the other speaker in a very gradual, very precisely controlled panning effect, so that the total volume of both speakers outputting together or individually never changed. And the person could never tell the difference between where the speakers were. But then the moment they moved the speakers, I think it was, and did the same test, and the reflections were different, the person had a much clearer sense of what was going on. And I don't remember the details. I'll try to remember to link the video in the show notes that talks about all this stuff, because it's quite fascinating. But the point being, what I took away from that was just how much processing our brains do of every single sound. So every sound that arrives to our ears within a certain window of time, and I can't remember off the top of my head what that window is, but it's like it might be in the first 50 milliseconds or something, so well less than a second. Anything at all that arrives to us in that first window, the brain lumps together as being the same sound. And so if someone hits a snare drum, we take the sound from the snare drum and any of the reflected sounds that hit us at the same time or within that first window that are also created by that snare drum, it will go, yep, that's all one sound. But then if there's another reflection that's gone off the back wall and to us, and it's hit us at, say, 60 milliseconds, our brain uses that information differently to then understand where is that snare drum in space. And that's not just the one reflection off the back wall, that's the reflection off that back wall, the side wall, the ceiling, the floor, the ones that bounce off the ceiling onto our shoulders and back up into it's mind-blowing how much processing goes into every single sound, and we're never aware of any of it. It all just happens and we just go, oh yeah, sound over there, snare drum. The only thing I can think of, and I don't think this relates to pitch, but maybe it does, is that when you're in a bar and you're further away from the speakers.
Oh, I was really, really drunk. Did I tell you that?
Well, that might change
No.
things.
No, sorry.
So yeah, when you're in a bar and you're a long way away from the speakers, or any situation, if it's quiet and there's lots and lots of distance between you and the source of the sound, the number of reflections going on and the way other sounds are going to therefore arrive at your ears at the same time may be skewing how your brain's able to perceive everything that's going on. Because how we understand the pitch and the timbre of what we're hearing is all about the fundamental frequency, which is like the main note being played by an instrument, but also the harmonic makeup around it. And the brain does some fascinating calculations. A good example is if you play a bass note, let's say how to explain this? If you're playing, let's say you've got a recording of an instrument playing a 22 hertz tone, or let's go 20 hertz tone, which is the lowest that theoretically we can hear. Let's say you've got a recording of that note.
Is that the brown note? No.
No, thankfully not. Although I think Mythbusters did an episode on the brown note and couldn't make it work. For those wondering, the brown note is the theoretical note that would create a resonance such that you would need to be changing your pants, let's say.
Yes, the vowel voiding tone.
That's the one, yes. The day you should have worn your brown pants. And so
Thanks for explaining that. Like, I was just going to let that just hang. I was going to, if you knew what a brown note was, you would giggle. We weren't going to come down a level and explain that to everyone. But thanks for doing that, Locke. I appreciate it. Please,
you're welcome.
Continue.
I do like to completely what's the word? I don't even know what the word is I'm looking for, but to take all value and credibility from our podcast in ways like that.
No, you're a gentleman. That's what it is. You were ensuring full accessibility.
Behind. Yes, if we're going there, everybody else is coming there with us.
I love it.
So, so if somebody plays a 20 hertz note or has a recording of a 20 hertz note and they play it through a pair of speakers, for instance, that can't produce a 20 hertz tone, they're physically incapable of that. Our brains, depending on just how bad those speakers are at getting down low, as long as they can get to a certain depth, our brain will still hear a 20 hertz note. And that's because if the speaker can produce 40 hertz, 80 hertz, each of the doublings of 20 hertz, if the speaker can produce enough of those harmonics, because a 20 hertz tone will include all of those harmonics, our brain goes, well, I'm hearing 40 and 80 and 160 and 320. The only note in the world that can produce that has to be a 20 hertz tone. And so it goes, well, I must be hearing a 20 hertz tone, and it creates it, essentially. It's mind-boggling. Yeah. And so
that's crazy.
Yeah, it's really nuts.
Why would our brains work that way? What's the sort of like genetic survival reason for like, oh, you're hearing 40 and 80 and 160 hertz, must be 20. Let's generate that.
Yeah, I don't actually.
I'm not pushing back. I'm just saying, like, that's incredible, right? Like, if you think about, the how genetic mutations survive, at some point that obviously happened. At some, or maybe, I don't know. Gosh, I don't know. We can move on.
I suppose what it probably is, and I think this relates to what your original question was about that in the bar pitch shifting experience. I had another thought of what could be causing it too. Come back to that. Remind me of the ambulance.
Well, I have a theory though. Finish your thought, and then I'll tell you what I think my theory is.
So I think.
Did I tell you I was really drunk? Sorry.
Are you still drunk?
I wasn't. Good go.
So I think what may be the evolutionary reason for that is that there are multiple reasons that we may not hear the bottom note in a sound. So there's things like masking, where if there's a louder sound compared to the sound you're trying to hear, the louder sound can mask our ability to hear, I should say, the more quiet sound. And so maybe it's just our brain's way of getting around masking to go, if I can hear these harmonics that are maybe at a different enough pitch that they're not being masked by that lower, louder sound, then I can piece together what I'm hearing and I'll know that was a lion that I heard, even though I maybe didn't hear the fundamental frequency of a lion's roar. I don't know. That's a guess.
That does make sense.
I think so. And the other reason it could just be that there's some mathematical magic going on in the way we perceive sound, that it just goes, well, whether you like it or not, I just know that this is what the sound is. So here you go, you can hear it. I don't know. So yeah, to finish off the thought that's related to that, it's possible that in the bar, when you're a long way away, you're hearing the sound of the music, but there's so much else intermingling with it at the same time, and maybe your brain can't distinguish exactly which sounds are belonging together in that first 50 millisecond packet of sound. And so it's just taking a best guess, and it just so happens to lead to it being perceived at a lower frequency or a lower pitch than what it really is. That's my guess, but I have no idea. That's well outside my knowledge area, and I'm just piecing stuff together from what I do know. But what's your theory?
Well, maybe theory is too generous a term, but I'm trying to think of the last time that it happened. I actually think it might have been Sultans of Swing. I think I was, it was busy, it was crowded, lots of people, lots of noise, long way from the house speakers, but it was sort of the lower end. It was the lower end sort of register that was sort of making its way to my ears. But because it was so many people around, because there were so many competing noises and noise pollution, and the speakers probably weren't great speakers. They're probably just cheap in ceiling house speakers. Mm-hmm. I wondered if all of that interference, like physical interference, as well as the bouncing of. So first of all, I don't think I was getting any of the high end frequencies. I think I was just getting sort of mid and lower end frequencies. Mm-hmm. But because they were crappy speakers, and because of all that when you add all of that sort of competing noise pollution and angles of stuff bouncing around, that over time, like timing over time and distance, a very low quality, poor quality, low powered sound actually drops in pitch. I don't know if that's true, like sort of like Doppler effect, but to
Yeah,
do
I was thinking about
but
Doppler
to
too.
do that's sort of what I was thinking.
Mm.
But the other thing, which is kind of maybe a little bit more unique to me, is I don't have perfect pitch, but I have like near perfect pitch. Like it's not perfect pitch, but I'm not too bad. And I actually wonder if that might be coming into play as well, because I'm hearing Sultans of Swing, like that is a song I could probably, accurately hit the correct pitches for the starting of that song, either, whatever. But because it's sort of playing and I kind of can't identify it, but I sort of do. And again, like this sort of maybe pseudo Doppler effect thing, I wonder if that sort of brain confusion results in me thinking that the song is actually pitched down into a lower key or not. But we don't have to keep litigating this.
No, that's all right. That was my thought as well, was that maybe because you're hearing a somehow distorted little bits and pieces of it, your brain's latching on to what you think you're hearing as a pitch, and then you're filling in the gaps because you know the song well. And then, unfortunately, for whatever reason, you've started off at the wrong pitch and you've held that. And then when you get close to the speaker and you can hear it properly, then you can hear more. But also knowing that you're hearing bass only initially, we're not good at perceiving bass pitches the way we are higher levels. Our brains lose acuity as we get to lower frequencies. And that's where some of that maths comes into play, where we use the information in the initial onset of the note to better understand bass, because we're not very good at understanding it on its own. And so it's probably a combination of all of that stuff wrapped up together that's causing it. It made me think of another thing. I don't have the issue with pitch that you mentioned. The one that I find fascinating, and I love it when it happens, because it's always this kind of enjoyable shock to the system. You know, when you can't quite hear a song properly and you get a rhythm in your mind and you're pretty certain that you've got the main emphasized beat, like the one of each bar, let's say. And then you start to hear the song properly and you realize that what you thought was the one is not the one at all. And you get this complete shift in your understanding of the rhythmic timing and pace of that track. I love it when that happens. I don't know. I think it's the same idea where you just can't quite hear it properly, so you don't get a sense of the emphasis. But I love it when that happens, when I hear a song and I'm thinking, okay, yeah, here's the one, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I get there, and it turns out that what I thought the one was actually the two, and it's just my brain just goes blah, and then it catches up, and I love it. So that's my nearest experience of it. I haven't experienced the pitch thing though.
No, I think we're saying the same thing. Maybe just we're having slightly different experiences. Cool. Well, I'm glad to. We didn't get to the bottom of it, but I'm glad that we sort of explored that a little bit, and I'm glad that you have a similar, because I think it's kind of fun too. Like it's not playing, and I'm not complaining about it. So I think it's
it's
just
interesting,
a fascinating sort of idiosyncrasy.
Yeah. And if anybody else out there, by the way, if anyone else listening,
if you know what we're talking about,
knows. Absolutely.
Tell us.
Ask thegroovepod@gmail.com. If anyone is more well-versed in hearing science than I am, which is very possible, because I'm by no means an expert in this area. I do research in bits and pieces for the channel, and I was originally studying to be a speech pathologist or even an audiologist at one point, but never pursued that further. So someone is bound to know a whole lot more than me. Whether they're listening to this is a whole other question. Well, I shouldn't say someone. Many people are bound to know a lot more about this than I am. But whether they're listening or not is another question. But if you are, ask thegroovepod@gmail.com. Is Nick going crazy, or was he just drunk? We need to know the bottoms of that. Get to the bottom of that one, I should say. Now, we're getting close to the hour mark, so I probably should wrap up soon. But I want to talk about music quickly with you as well, Nick. And a magazine, of course. Larger than average magazines. You put me on to Corey Henry a while ago. You mentioned him in one of our podcasts. And I put a couple of his albums into my Discovery playlist that I just, when I get a chance to listen to music, I put it on and I see what I like. His album, I think called Best of Me or The Best of Me, I was okay. It didn't make it into my favorites list, but it was a decent listen. Operation Funk is an album of his. That album absolutely rocks. It has got such a good groove the whole way through it. I reckon that was on repeat for a few days for me, that album. It's just such a cool album, couple of standout tracks, and it's really well recorded too. I was really impressed. I think I've put it into I've got like an Is This an Audiophile album playlist as well, where I chuck stuff that I think sounds amazing in there, And then when I'm looking for review tracks to hear stuff at its best, I'll play through it, and then through the proper gear, I'll then decide, okay, is this or isn't this worthy of an ongoing reference point? So I just wanted to thank you for setting me up with Corey Henry, specifically the Operation Funk album is just so cool, so fun. So thank you for that one. I appreciate the recommendation.
You're welcome. And I believe there's a live version of the album too, which is amazing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll definitely check that out.
Yeah, look for the live version as well. It's
Nice.
it's a ton of fun.
Okay.
Yes, and now I get to thank you because I was listening to your most recent recommendation from the previous
John Batiste,
episode,
Big Money,
which was John Batiste, Big Money, and then which I enjoyed. It was fantastic. I loved the just diversity of all the different genres that he was exploring in that album, and then I let it play. Once it finishes, and your streaming service just keeps playing music if you tell it to do that, and it started to play. Oh my gosh, hang on. I'll bring it up now. Nate Smith. Do you know Nate Smith?
The name rings a bell, but I couldn't say off the top of my head.
Nate Smith, and particularly an album called Live Action with a hyphen, live hyphen action, Nate Smith. It came out in August 2025.
Okay.
It's great. I highly recommend that.
Okay.
A lot of really cool guests on the album as well too, and it's modern jazz with some funk and electronica, and it was very cool. So you get credit for that one because that came out of the John Batiste very next album. So thank you so much for that.
I'll give that a go for sure. I love that sort of stuff. So that sounds great.
And I have ordered on Discogs a copy of the Buena Vista Social Club on 180 gram vinyl. It has not arrived yet, but I'm excited to listen to that. And that was a recommendation from Adam, I believe.
Yes, that was. I think that was in the Discord. I think it was in my Discord chat, wasn't it? Where I think someone said, or you might have asked, does anyone have recommendations for really good quality vinyl recordings? And I think he recommended that one. So, I mean, that's a good recording on CD as well. So, assuming it's been mastered well in the transfer onto vinyl from whatever the original masters were, then that would make sense. That it would sound great. Yeah,
I'm interested to hear that, and I have that on CD as well. That's an album that I've enjoyed for a long time. So interested to hear what that'll sound like on vinyl.
Yeah,
but I'm always open to and interested in hearing recommendations, not just for music, but what's something that sounds great on vinyl or unique on vinyl. That's the other thing too. I really am interested in hearing stuff that sounds great but different to the digital releases.
Yeah.
So that's a thing I'm sort of trying to dig into a little tiny bit.
Yeah, that can be really fun. I've actually wanted to do and just finding the time and to a degree the motivation, because it's going to be a bit of a hard slog, I think. I'd love to do a video at some stage, or maybe we talk about it on the podcast, going through some of the different versions of albums available on streaming platforms. So I remember years ago I was looking for, I think it was the Fleetwood Mac Rumours album, and I searched for it on Tidal.
I've heard of them.
Yeah, just a little band. They had a few hits. And I remember looking up, I think it was Rumours, and I looked it up, and there were about 4 or 5 different versions of the same album on Tidal, I think it was. It might have been Cobras. And some of them would have been deluxe versus regular versions versus anniversary versions or whatever. But some of them were also remastered or not remastered. And when it was remastered, I think whichever one it was I was looking at, it had the original plus a remaster from, say, 2018 and a remaster from 2020. And I'm just making these numbers up, or these dates up. But the point being, I'm looking at it going, how do you know which one to choose when you've got 3 or 4 options available? And I was also curious to know, how often does that happen, where you might go searching for an album that you've had on CD or vinyl and you want to add it to your streaming catalog. You get in there and you're suddenly confronted with multiple different versions of the same album, and you go, well, I don't know which one's going to sound the best. And some of them, like if the Fleetwood Mac one, I remember listening to it and being very underwhelmed. The sound was, I remember it from a kid when it was on vinyl, and it sounded great. It was a really, really fantastic album. The track Don't Stop had a great rhythm and drive to it on vinyl. And I remember listening to it on streaming going, oh, this is not what I remember. It kind of lacked body and weight to the sound. It had been mastered too thin and too lean. And so I thought, I wonder how many albums out there are remastered multiple times on streaming platforms, and how on earth anybody is meant to work out which is actually the best sounding master. So that's probably another one to send out there to anyone that might have ideas on that one. If you've got any thoughts on that, askthegroovepod@gmail.com. Have you found masters multiple different versions, multiple different masters of albums on streaming platforms like Tidal and Qobuz. Did you find one that you found was better? And if so, which one was it? I would love to hear that, and might look at putting together a video, or even we have an episode where Nic and I chat about some of those here on the podcast.
Sounds good.
And I think that's probably brings us to a close, and we'll just keep the larger than average bag of Zunes for the next episode when we can get Adam in.
It's sitting here next to me, ready for the next episode, Locke.
Let's do it though. Let's actually finally put people out of their misery. I will make an effort to reach out to Adam. Adam, if you're listening to this, hit me up on Discord. Let's schedule a session, and we will talk about Nic's larger than average bag of Zunes.
Oh, it's a euphemism, by the way. They're not actually real Zunes.
I'm just dying to find out what they really are now. Awesome. Well, thanks as always, Nic. This has been fun.
Thank you, Locke.
And we'll chat to everyone again soon.
Stay in the groove.